temples and explaining them as best I can from a symbolist point of view, I realized this morning that with the pyramids, it's sort of the opposite. You have to see them first before you can appreciate the problems that are involved. And having been in it, you have a sense of why what the problems involve. So, in fact, I mean, normally with the Great Pyramid, I don't even get a chance to really deal with it because, as I say, we're so busy with other stuff. And I guess just this morning realizing why, I mean, I don't make a point of giving a pyramid wrap. It's because it should be after we have the experience. And then one of the reasons we don't do it is that right after the experience, the last thing in the world you want is a bunch of complex Egyptology regarding the pyramids. But now, having just been to Gamal, or anyway, having finished breakfast, whatever we're going to do, this is a good time. We've all been there. So, with the Great Pyramid, of course, to begin with, it most assuredly wasn't a tomb, or certainly not a tomb only, as they always say, in Congress, the Democrats refer to the Republicans as our friends across the aisle, and vice versa, whereas they both hate the other's guts and would like to see him eviscerated. Our friends across the aisle, not friends at all. Our fake colleagues that are preventing us from getting the message out to a whole bunch of people who'd like to hear it. Anyway, tombs only, you get a sense of, having been now in a number of tombs, how totally unsuitable the Great Pyramid or the Red Pyramid the other day would have been for a tomb, especially the Great Pyramid, having seen what some of the royal tombs were like in Luxor, these vast tombs that would have been crammed full of all kinds of objects and furniture and gold and jewelry and stuff. The pyramid is hardly any room for anything, much less that kind of profusion of wealth. Apart from that, there is this question of evidence. There is no evidence it was ever a tomb. The reasoning, the rationale for insisting that it's a tomb is that there is a sarcophagus there, and so there is. Now, among the problems, or among the issues, is that, to the best of my knowledge, there was never found a lid, or a broken lid, to the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid, which is also too big to fit through the corridor that leads from the top of the Grand Gallery to into the pyramid itself. And this is contradictory to Egyptian practice, in which the sarcophagus is placed with the mummified body of the pharaoh in it, is placed in the tomb once the pharaoh is mummified and everything is prepared. So, under those circumstances, it couldn't have gotten into this, or wouldn't have been put into the tomb at the time it should have been put in. That said, I just lost my own thread. So there's no evidence for that, or for the. Okay, what I wanted to say was that the profusion of work, of books on the pyramid is really beyond imagination. In 1907, an avid pyramid researcher named Louis McCarty wrote that at that time, 1907, the volume of literature written about the Great Pyramid alone was such that no one person could get through it in a lifetime. Add another 109 years to that, and the volume is exponential. There's almost no month that goes by without somebody sending me unasked a 500-page volume filled with do, and half the time I don't mean it's way beyond my limited expertise on such matters to judge the damn thing. I have to go by a sort of what I call, and I tell people, I go by a kind of informed intuition, having done this a lot, having been involved in this a lot. I kind of trust my intuition. I can be dead wrong. I could be dead wrong, but I get a kind of a sense of whether it's sound or not. But it would be nice. It would be really nice, actually, if somebody takes that up, somebody with the right kinds of skills, mathematical and technical skills that I don't have, to actually take on the more responsible work that's been done and look into it to see if it stands up. And actually, Dane, I'm thinking maybe of you. We've had these kinds of discussions where you're talking about about getting deep into, on a personal level, getting deep into Egypt and the problems. And I'm just now thinking, I mean, you're not obliged to even think about it, but if you do, I mean, we could have a discussion, because there are a number of things that I've half promised people to take a look at, and then I take a look at it and I say, I can't do this. This is out of my range, and I almost don't know anyone except for my friend Michael Schneider, who's written, by the way, a book. Anybody interested in the number and symbolism side of things and the geometry side of things, high on your reading list should be Michael Schneider's wonderfully titled book, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe. That's a really good book. And Michael is a math teacher, so he writes very lucidly about the subject, and he's very good on the number symbolism. But he's the only one, and he's just one guy. There are a number of books out there dealing with the mathematical properties of the pyramid and its geodetic and its geodesic qualities, as well as the whole history of measure, where that's a special sub-discipline. It's all why measures are as they are. My understanding is that they're related to each other around the world, and all have as their basis a supreme knowledge of the size of the Earth, its diameter, and its circumference. Beyond me to really pass judgment on. I mean, some of them feel right, and some of them don't, but I don't know either what's valid and what's not. So anybody wanting to devote the next 40 years to something that pays them no money are welcome to take up this real problem of the pyramids. Anyway, back to the Great Pyramid. The entrance that we went in, that was cut into it was obviously not original to the pyramid, was forced in by a caliph of old Fatimid, I think, of 10th century, called Al-Mamun. And of course the legend came down through early Islam. The legend came down that there was a treasure buried, that the king was buried, the pharaoh was buried in the pyramid, and there was, of course, treasure there. Everybody's always looking for treasure. The reason that he couldn't get in the first place was that from Greco-Roman sources, we understand that the pyramid was perfectly covered over with casing stones, and there was no indication anywhere of an entrance anywhere. But there was a legend supported by I'm sure it was Latin or Greco-Roman historian named Strabo, who said that, I think that he said that he was told there was a hidden stone that, if you knew which one it was, it would open and touch, and it would give you access into the chambers exterior of the pyramid. That's the actual entrance, which was, in Al-Mamun's day, obviously, all covered over. So anyway, Al-Mamun is credited. Supposedly they hacked through. That led them into that passage, which led them into the Grand Gallery, which led them into the King's Chamber, and the sarcophagus in it. I am not sure if the sarcophagus is now where it was originally supposed to be. It feels right. I don't know if that's the case. No treasure whatsoever. And again, the legend was that Al-Mamun had some of his trusted aides sneak in and in the coffer or somewhere in the pyramid, hide exactly the amount the workers were supposed to get paid. Not even a bonus, but that's the legend. Absolutely no idea. Anyhow, Al-Mamun is then credited, and I didn't get to notice there were just a few people when I got out around, and other people had already left. I don't know if you noticed the stairway going up the exterior of the pyramid to get up to the Al-Mamun passage. At the very bottom of that, the remaining casing stones, original casing stones, and these are works of, feats of technology in their own right. They're not 100 tons or anything like that. They're 15 tons, which is a sizable block of Tora limestone, the best quality limestone, set each upon its own pedestal, which is how the pyramid was built, and joined together with unbelievable precision. We have a picture, probably, of me holding a credit, trying to put this credit card into the tiny, huge, almost invisible slot between two of the blocks. You can't. And if you multiply that by the surface area of the pyramid, which is 22 acres, and that's pretty big. You feed a lot of people on 22 acres. And yet presumably all of them are finished to that degree of precision, and all of them except these five have been lost. Usual story, again, conjecture. Good study. Mamun or his followers, I'm not sure, stripped off all of those casing stones, and they were used to build, or I'm not sure if rebuild, the beginning, the founding new city of Cairo. I rebuilt because there was a big earthquake somewhere around that time, and maybe they needed lots of quarry blocks to do the building. But it's given out as a matter of fact that all of these casing stones disappeared, were stripped off, and were used in the construction, reconstruction. But if you stop to think about it, that's a hell of a lot of limestone. In order to make it usable, first of all, you got to get it off more or less intact, and it has a slope to it. Every single stone has a slope. It's not a nice handy block that you can then just incorporate into a new bridge or a new mast. It's a 15-pound block, and in order to make it serviceable for reusing, to begin with, you have to cut off the slopey part. So, all right, maybe that gets three or four of the tons. Are we already into the city? Well, gee, this was not that traffic. Where I think we are. Anyway, so, but I've never read anything that evidence that these blocks went into building Cairo, And I mean, I just haven't. I've just said this a dozen times. You can't know everything, and you can't look up everything, even though now there's the internet. So it may be that somewhere, hiding away someplace, or buried in plain sight, is a is a study of somebody who has said, well, here there are blocks, and there are blocks, and you add them all up, and you get 22 acres. But I haven't seen it. So to me, it's still a mystery where all of those blocks actually went. It's also possible that lots of them got burned by the locals, because when you burn limestone, you get slate lime, which is great for fertilizer, and they also could have used it for, recycled some of the blocks for their own use, having nothing to do with rebuilding Cairo. I don't know, but it's an interesting question. Now, we go into Al-Mahmoud's passage, and then we go up the narrow, constricted, ascending passage, and that takes us to the beginning of the Grand Gallery. You probably didn't notice them. I said I wasn't pointing these things out, because I don't. We're going up there, I'm going to be silent. Everyone going up there, but to the left, sorry, to the right, there's a grate over what is actually a very rough hole cut through the already finished, the already constructed pyramid. This is called the well. It's kind of a big hole. Well, the well looks sort of like a very badly dug well that goes all the way down to, for those of you who got down to the pit, all the way down to the pit, and then is left off at the pit. The usual story, again, by no evidence whatsoever, is that this is how the workmen who are going to be doomed in as the pyramid was shut were able to escape. Nobody's ever explained how they were supposed to escape by getting up this well, because getting up it is a production in its own right. It's, what, 100-something feet deep, and it doesn't have any stairs in it, doesn't have any ropes going out of it, and it's cut in such a way that you couldn't sort of scale it, and repel it or anything like that. And so it's really a big mystery, and Shock and I think that there's some evidence we're putting together that the Great Pyramid, like the Cairo Pyramid, and like the Menkaure Pyramid, and like the Red Pyramid too, is built, is actually built in stages, and also that resonance plays a major part in, especially in the Great Pyramid. Now, you noticed when we were all in the King's Chamber that to make yourself heard, you actually have to whisper, because of the reverberation in there, or resonance. I'm not sure what the exact technical term is. Now, what makes that happen is, we haven't discussed this, but all of this is in the guidebook, by the way, a lot of it. Above that flat roof of the King's Chamber are three separate, they're not exactly chambers, but they're spaces. There are three more flat roofs like that. Look sort of like a jet column, maybe deliberately. And on top of that, a gable roof that goes like this, that holds the whole superstructure above it up. Usual explanation is that these are relieving chambers. They're sort of stone rollways. But the truth is that they don't relieve anything. And lots of architects and engineers have looked at those and said this is nonsense, because below, those of you who got into the Queen's Chamber, you saw that the roof of the Queen's Chamber was, again, stone, giant gabled stones, like so, and that holds everything up. And the King's Chamber is 100 feet higher than the Queen's Chamber, and so why not just put the gabled roof over it, which is good enough to take all the downward thrust pressure off the King's Chamber below. Well, they don't bother with such stuff. They just think that they can't think of anything else, even though resonant qualities of that room are absolutely self-evident. I mean, you cannot miss them. And I don't know of any place on earth, not that I've been to every place on earth, but I don't know of any place that has that resonance at that level. And it should have occurred to one of these guys that, hey, maybe they were deliberately creating this in order to have this kind of strange reverb chamber. But they don't even consider it. But it always struck me that maybe that played a major role in whatever the pyramid was actually built for. And I always wondered if the pit, which is another big mystery, because the pit, as you saw, is left unfinished. And it's more complicated than just left unfinished, because there's a part of it that's sort of the part when you just go in, there's a hole, like with a shaft, not exactly a shaft, but a circular place that's left intact with a few big boulders cut into it, and then off to the right are two. The ceiling's been all cut out roughly, and then the stone has been cut away, leaving these two walls like this and like this, walls of stone with space in between them, just left there for no apparent reason. It looks to us anyway, shocking myself, as though there are two stages of work in the pyramid, in that pit itself. Anyway, the John theory was that resonance played a major role in whatever the pyramid's function was, and that the reason for the pit being left unfinished was not that usual explanation. Khufu was having the pit dug out for himself, and that at a certain place decided that a nasty old pit was not the kind of pit, not the kind of grave a true megalomaniacal pharaoh, the earliest possible incarnation of Donald Trump, would really merited to be buried in. You really needed something grander, so he had the Queen's Chamber constructed, and he looked at that and he said, it looks too damned effeminate, so they built the King's Chamber, and he said, oh well, that's okay, I think I won't be buried in here either. But the resonance part made sense to me, and two things. One, I hypothesized that if you had to tune a stone instrument, and there's some backup for this actually, if you had to tune a stone instrument, there are two possibilities. Obviously with a stringed instrument, you tighten the frets. With a wind instrument, you adjust the reeds. But if you had a stone instrument, like a cave or something like that, and you wanted to get a certain, you wanted to resound or to resonate to a particular note, you could either hollow it out until you got the note that you wanted, and or have a big, let's say a cavern of a big space, and put boulders in until you dampened the resonance until it gave you the note that you wanted. So I like that theory, apart from the fact that it was mine, and always wondered if, in fact, let's say if chanting was, or song, or audible sound was part of the pyramid plan for whatever reason, that I always wondered if you did something to chant it up in the King's Chamber, could you hear it down in the pit? And it didn't seem logical that you could, because, as you know, the King's Chamber, there it is, and then it has a narrow passage that goes out of it, and then it goes down the Grand Gallery. At the end of the Grand Gallery, in order to get down to the pit, you have to go hook a U, and then go down the long descending passage that goes to the pit. And sound waves, at least as far as I understood, we're not supposed to go around corners easily. So the matter rested there until in one trip we had a lot of people who were interested in the theory. So we experimented, and some people stayed on the top and you know, did a major ohms, and some people were down at the pit, and sure enough they could hear it actually very, very clearly what was going on at the top. So does this prove that the chanting and resonance was part of the pyramid? No, but it does add some sort of, let's say, plausibility to the hypothesis. And then thinking further, shocking myself, as far as we're concerned, the Khafra pyramid is a done deal in terms of separate, separate stages of construction. The Cairo pyramid, almost as much so. The Red pyramid, well, it's clear that that highest chamber is a megalithic chamber and was there first, and they built the pyramid around it. Whoever was Nefru, supposedly, I'm not so sure, built the pyramid around it. So that was clear. But then, with the Great Pyramid, there is not that kind of pretty convincing evidence. But Chuck and I were discussing this, and you see, probably some of you anyway know the whole thing about the cartouches, roughly daubed cartouches in the so-called relieving chambers that mention Khufu, and Zechariah Sitchin said that they were forgeries put in there by Howard Weiss, who first excavated the pyramid in 1837, and in fact dynamited his way through the first of the relieving chambers, so-called, to get to the chambers above, and discovered these cartouches. So as forgeries, however, and this was the thing, these German guys got in big trouble for scraping a little bit of the paint off because they were trying to prove, again, Sitchin hypothesis that the pyramids were much, much older. Well, we think they were much, much older too, but that's not the evidence. And those cartouches, we've been up there a few times, Sean and myself, they are, as sure as damn it, legitimate. And Khufu's, the dating of Khufu's reign is pretty solid. And so, without there being another much, much earlier king called Khufu, the matter rests that Khufu is the builder of the pyramid. But or was he? Did he come along later and to make have built a huge addition to whatever was there before this, whatever structure was there before, an addition much more spectacular perhaps than whatever was there originally? Well, maybe. This is not implausible. We are thinking, and I'll get into this in a second, we are thinking that the entire, what we see now, the Grand Gallery and everything that's involved in it, and that's, everything that's involved in it, including the King's Chamber, maybe not the Queen's Chamber, is a later addition put on by Khufu, hence the cartouches there, because they were in fact put there during his reign. This remains to be seen. This is again where somebody has to look at the hypothesis, from an engineering architectural point of view that is certainly beyond my ability to judge. I mean, it's not going to be easy to figure that out. But there are lots of intriguing bits of intriguing factual bits that could be evidence that this is indeed the case. One is the purpose of the Grand Gallery itself. By the way, that essential book to read on this, even though it's 50 years old now, is Peter Tompkins' Secrets of the Great Pyramid. There's not much in that that's incorrect, but there's a fair amount that's been added to it since the 50 years have gone by. But it's a particularly readable and thorough and and even-handed discussion of these various pyramid problems. Some of what you're getting from me now come from Tompkins's book. But what Chuck and I were looking for was evidence also. Chuck came up with this, that nothing explains, or so far has explained, or even come close to explaining, the well, this deeply cut grotto-like funnel thing that goes from the entrance of the Grand Gallery down to the pit itself. And Jacques was taken, was agreeing that resonance may have played, or probably did play, a major role in whatever the function the pyramid served. And if you just as hollowing out the pit in order to get the resonance right, if you wanted to decommission the pyramid, one of the ways you might do that would be by cutting a big hole in the core masonry of the pyramid itself. Furthermore, how advised dynamiting his way into the set of relieving chambers. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention those relieving chambers are another miracle and mystery of construction. Those big blocks that span the King's Chamber weigh about 70 tons, and getting them up to the halfway point of the pyramid and into place, and there were 4 levels of them, is a huge mystery, and none of this proposed ramp theories that are favored by the academics bother to try to explain, even if they could get the smaller blocks up and into place. The core masonry of the core masonry of the pyramid is about, those blocks are mostly 2, 3, 4, well, no more than 2, 4, maybe average 4 tons or so. That's a pretty big block, but it's not, given the Egyptian ability to sling around substantial weights, it's not that formidable. But 70-ton blocks, that's a different matter altogether. And of course they're granite, so they come down from Aswan. And as is always the case, the deeper you look into these things, the more mysterious they become. Anyway, so Vise's blasting his way in would also destroy the resonance, but of course that's contemporary, or relatively contemporary. And in fact, when we looked, Chuck and I looked at the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber, you notice that it doesn't have a lid, and it seems never to have had a lid. It's a sarcophagus that's built in order to take a lid, but what happened to the lid? Certainly Al-Mamun, if he got in there and was hiding enough treasure to feed his workmen, he's not going to bother to take out what would have been about a 4 or 5 ton lid. And if they broke it into pieces, what are they going to do? Sell the pieces as grockle bait to wandering 11th century tourists? Probably not. Lack of lid is a kind of interesting fact, if indeed it is true. You need somebody to go look back into where are the earliest notes of Howard Vise or whatever, and see if he mentions a lid. I mean, that's doable. You've got to be able to find his field note somewhere or another. But until or unless somebody does that and finds that there was sure enough a lid, there's no evidence of a lid. So further, we're thinking that, and there are other, and I won't get into it, I'm getting tired of this already. There are other, let's say, bits of circumstantial evidence that further suggest this, multiple stages of construction. Oh yeah, the one I was going to talk about, the Grand Gallery is another big mystery. Why do they need this? If they're going to bury the pharaoh, they certainly don't need it. Just to get up, if the whole objective is to get up to the King's Chamber to do some sort of ritual or some sort of ceremony, you hardly need I think it's a 28-foot ceiling. And of course, you may have maybe noticed that those of you who are walking near me, we pointed out the again incredible tolerances of the stonework, the precision. When Flinders Petrie, probably more than anyone else, the founder of modern archaeology, and I think he was a surveyor and engineer. I forget exactly, but with he was, he came with technical credentials, and he commented that the tolerances of the Grand Gallery, all 100 and some odd feet of it, were those that were used in his day, 1890s, 1880s, 1900, were those that applied to optics, not to masonry. So, that's what you're confronted by there, and then it just doesn't make any sense. Now, earlier than Petrie, the very eminent, and Tompkins is good on this, particularly good on this chapter. Tompkins goes into the work of an astronomer, well-known astronomer. He made him in the Astronomer Royal of England, named Richard Proctor. Again, as credentialed as he could get back in 1860 or 70, whenever he wrote, who surmised that the pyramid was used as an astronomical observatory, and he said that if the Grand Gallery were not roofed over and the pyramid were only built to its halfway stage, so that you had this deep slot, unroofed slot, facing the sky, then you may have noticed the slots along the sides of the Grand Gallery that look as though they were made to receive something or another. He hypothesized, Proctor, that these were viewing stations. You had, look at this cool 1928 or 29 or 30 car. What is this? Ford. Yeah, I thought so. Model A Ford. Cool. And that if you had observers on planks spanning that with the stars transiting across the slot at the top, 85% of the southern skies could be tracked by that method. Well, okay, question now arises, why should they want to do that or bother to do that? John's hypothesis is that taking as a given that our water weathering of the Sphinx and all of the other evidence that's been gathered by Hancock and Boval and ourselves and a whole bunch of other people, that the ancient civilization, the lost civilization, is an established fact. One of the scenarios involving that hypothesis is that that the civilization, call it Atlantis for lack of a better or more handier term, that, boy, I watch these guys with their motorbikes going through it, an inch either side. They're very skillful or very brave. Wouldn't like to do that. Anyway, so that some kind of a massive catastrophe is involved in destroying that civilization, and an element within those hypotheses is that something hugely cosmological and astronomical took place that knocked the Earth off its kilter in some way or another. And if that were the case, I mean, it's becoming clear that astronomy, precession, all of these things were known about in very, very ancient times, and as I've stressed on any number of occasions, were incorporated into the orchestration of the civilizations themselves, especially in Egypt, probably elsewhere as well. I think people who've done Schwaller type work in India and then, with China, with ancient China and so on, have come to somewhat similar conclusions. So it may have been that the cosmic order, sort of like with the Osirian, and with Seti the first reestablishing cosmic equilibrium and reinstating the worship of Ma'at, that maybe on the cosmological level, on the grander level, the astronomy had gotten was no longer in place, and so it was incumbent upon Khufu or whoever was reigning and had that kind of power and that kind of the ability to do this kind of work, that they needed to reestablish the facts of the relevant facts of astronomy. And so the Grand Gallery was built in order to determine those facts, and then when they had everything that they needed, they covered it up. I mean, they continued building, and voila, in due course, there was the Great Pyramid. This is something that somebody could check, but again, it's not going to be me. But that would be a really interesting mission, to try and determine if indeed it's possible that the Grand Gallery and everything attached to it is indeed an add-on, and if so, how would the Proctor slot, the Proctor hypothesis, fit into that scenario? And then work on, maybe even with computers you could, I don't know, but maybe you could fill in the blanks, as it were. I don't know how you do this, but somehow do a scale model of the pyramid itself. How would you test the resonances? I don't know, but fill in the well so that it got so that it was solid again, which it once had been. Fill in the whereby dynamited his way through, fill in Al-Mamun's passage, and you'd have the original of the pyramid again, and see what those resonances were, if you could do this. I'm not even saying you could, but interesting thought experiment to try it. Oh, and by the way, what I was saying before about the King's Chamber and the missing lid, I lost my track. You notice that the pyramid, the coffer itself, has been damaged. One corner has been pretty severely knocked away, and the usual explanation is that, well, they had to hammer it away in order to pry the lid up. Yeah, you might well have to do that, but you wouldn't have to pry it away as much as, you wouldn't have to hammer away as much as you did. In fact, if you were going to get the lid off, you wouldn't want that much hammered away, because you wouldn't get as good a purchase. You'd want it much less in order to, a strong enough iron bar, strong enough lever to pry the thing off, but you wouldn't need what's there now. Alternative to that is that, well, it was that way, and then Grockles coming in over the centuries were knocking off pieces of it as souvenirs to bring home. Not illogical. Grockles do that sort of thing. So, jury's still out on every one of those questions, but anyway, that gives you something of an idea of the very real problems that surround the Great Pyramid itself. None of which, by the way, not one of these hypotheses is even broached in Mark Lehner's remarkably misnamed book called The Complete Pyramids. I mean, everything is incomplete with the pyramids, except at one point the pyramids themselves. So, anyway, that'll do us for now. We're getting not too far from the museum, which is just across the way. So, let us switch to the museum. When we get there, whatever time that's going to be, what is it now? Oh, jeez, it's 1 o'clock already. Well, we're going to stay there as long as we have to stay, and that's as long as we want to stay, which will be, we won't be there for sure for another 15 minutes. When we get there, I'll direct you to where everything is. When you get in, you'll see there's all of this is self-evident. You go in, and directly in front of you is a kind of a hallway with a lot of very early dynastic and pre-dynastic works. Some of them, there are a couple of those miraculous stone bowls that are hollowed out in the center that nobody can figure out. Carved from a single piece of a very hard stone, hollow, with a thin wall, a lip maybe 1/4 inch or less thick, and the walls themselves are that, and then they bulbs out like that. Nobody can figure out how they would do that, and perhaps at least as much to the point why anybody would want to do that with a stone bowl. I mean, completely illogical for storing anything or for pouring anything from. Bizarre. Anyway, then if you don't go down that room, then beyond that there's a big open space, an atrium as it were, where there's a lot of secondary works. You don't have to bother with that. But with the pre-dynastic stuff, in fact, you don't even have to bother with that. We're going to go there too. But just as you get in, to our left starts the Old Kingdom exhibit, and that you want to pay quite a bit of attention to. You want to really walk your way slowly through there, feasting on some of the most spectacular sculpture Egypt or any other civilization that's ever produced. You keep going along there, eventually you get to a relatively short passage. Not passage, but a part of the same hallway that is that has Middle Kingdom. That has Middle Kingdom, and then Middle Kingdom, and then second intermediate period stuff of when the Hyksos were there. That gives way, and then get to a stairway, but you hook a right, and that takes you into New Kingdom and Hatshepsut, and a lot of very magnificent work. And you keep going there, and eventually you get opposite where you would have been, well, the pre-dynastic stuff is. And there to your left is a big Akhenaten room, and there we can continue the argument over whether or not he was, the great original monotheist, so misunderstood by his evil compeers, or whether or not he was, a kind of a religious fanatic who didn't understand his own religion and was trying to impose his version upon it, upon the hapless Egyptian people. We may never know the answer to that, but there's some very, very interesting, Akhenaten sculpture there, and Akhenaten, artifacts. Backtrack from there, and you go up the stairs, go back to the end of that corridor, and you go up the stairs. It doesn't matter where you go up the stairs, really, because you're going to get to 3/4 of the top floor is given over to the Tutankhamun treasures. Amazing that they fit those things into a tomb about the size of this bus, not much bigger. Unbelievable. They would be moving men. They would be star moving men that are around today. And there, we'll be going through there, but this is all free time. I should have said, I don't think I did say that. For the first hour is free time. And what you want to do, you want to make sure that you get into the jewelry room. And if you run up the stairs that I said to go up, and you go through, you go past the golden shrines, that were once nested, and then to the left, if you're going from the biggest of the shrines to the smaller one. That's correct, or the smallest to the biggest, I forget which it goes. Anyway, there's the jewelry room, if you don't see it instantly, or maybe if you have the guidebook with you. Oh shit, I have to bring the guidebook. Damn it. Anybody have the guidebook with them? Keep meetings if you bring it along. No? Oh well. Too bad. It's okay, actually, we're sort of pressed for time, so I couldn't read off the passage. I probably wouldn't get around to reading off the passage from the Hermetica. We still have a day and a half, so I can get that to you. Make sure you get to the jewelry room, because see, that you can't do even with a relatively small group. You can't get 15 people, you know, with their nose to the glass looking at some miraculous piece of, you know, bracelet or pendant or pectoral or whatever. So make sure you get to the jewelry room. Otherwise, we'll go through the Tutankhamun galleries as best we can. I mean, you'll see. We'll take a full hour to see it for, you know, free time. You absolutely need that free hour. I'd like to have another 15 minutes at least, but we won't do that. Hour, and then we'll regroup. When we come in the entranceway, you'll see, you know, you get past the scanners and the other stuff. You get just past them, and on a wall facing you, just at 1 o'clock, you know, at your eye level, you'll see the black replica Rosetta Stone. That's where we meet. We'll see whatever time we get in there. We'll take 1 hour from there, and that's where we'll meet, and we'll spend probably at least 2 hours, but maybe not much more. I mean, often we spend more than that, but in fact, the last half hour or 3/4 of an hour, everybody's flagging and not listening, or, you know, sitting down because they can't handle it anymore. So 2 hours is probably as much as we can actually handle. And I've often wondered about that, because a couple of people have commented on the trip that, you know, at the end of the day, okay, I've been, you know, a little bit off color for some of this trip, but even so, other people have commented on how exhausting it is, and compared to, you know, it's not as hard as an 8-day physical day that some of you guys, especially you're all young and fit, you know, do without much problem. And yet here at the end of the day, you're exhausted, and me too. And museums even more so. They seem to intensify the degree of tiredness. And you're walking on a nice smooth stone floor, marble floor, or whatever. Why should it be as tiring? I think I know for a museum, and that is that all of these objects that we're looking at are very high level works of art, and they have their own soul, and literally their own soul, and a lot of intensity. And they were never built, they were never carved in order to be seen in this kind of context. So when we're taking it all in, and we're going from one side to another, to something quite different, one after another, and historically we're looking at 3,000 years worth of different artifacts, all in somewhat different, considerably different styles, and it's like, not quite correct analogy, but it's not far off. It's like listening to a symphony orchestra in which each of the instruments is playing something different. You're going to get a cacophony that, even if it's all some of the best music in the world, it's going to sound like a jumble. And it's going to be deafening and impossible to listen to. And that's the John theory, anyway, of why museums are always so tiring. Because they, at least for me, they always are. So, anyway, if that's not the correct, that's not a correct analysis, it doesn't matter, the museum is still very tiring. So we'll spend about 2 hours out of there, and then we'll head, if anybody is still on their feet, for the market, for the Khan al-Khalili, and there I know at least the ladies will get a second wind because we'll be buying stuff. So that's about it. We now have, I can use a few minutes break, but this traffic, you know, we're still on the other side of the river, so, and it ain't going to get much better, much quicker. So we will do the best we can. We'd have been stuck in the traffic if we came in an hour earlier too, and I think just about everybody that's spoken to me about it is very pleased that we went to see that remarkable man Gamal.
Nope.
If you have any questions, you can ask them, but I won't answer. What?
There you have it. Steve.
Why? Oh, good. I do. Oh, and now, you know, there's a big benefit now. Recently, 3 Cheers for Technology, they have these guiding systems now, where before, I mean, particularly when the museum was chock-a-block with people, we'd always go at lunchtime when it would ease off, at least for an hour or so, more or less. But this museum is, you know, it was built easy early in the era of museums, so they didn't really know about things like acoustics, and they didn't really know about presentation. So it's really, I've described it as like a warehouse full of masterpieces, and it's a really ugly building too. It won a prize. God knows what the others looked like, unless the submitting architect used the ancient Egyptian method of securing a contract called bakshish, because it looks like it looks like the town hall of some provincial French city. Beaux-Arts, I think the style is Beaux-Arts. It's not Art Nouveau. And what's the other one from around that period? Not Art Nouveau.
Art Deco.
Art Deco. Yeah, it's neither Art Deco nor Art Nouveau, but it's Nouveau, Art Nouveau, and it's very characterless and very un-Egyptian. I mean, it really looks continental, and here they had the thing filled with the most spectacular collection of Egyptian artifacts anywhere in the world. They put them inside this dull-looking provincial French piece of architecture. Anyway, the advantage is sort of that everything's very badly marked, and some very interesting things aren't marked at all. When I started coming here, a lot of the you know, information things were on index cards written in purple ink in French. Unfortunately, I can read French, so I can follow them. But this is not a great Egyptian, not a great contemporary Egyptian field of expertise. So everything's all over the place and badly displayed, and the advantage is that sometimes you turn a corner and it's as though you've discovered some incomparable masterpiece for yourself, because it doesn't have a special light on it, and it's not particularly featured, and it's exquisite. Anyway, we do the best we can, and soon, not too long from now, all of this will be moved out to Giza nearby, which will be a big advantage, at least for us and our kinds of trips. Except that I'm waiting to see how they're going to put things and how you're going to get around, because it's so enormous. I mean, much bigger than the Met or any Louvre or any of those things. So we'll see.